Coming up next, Bill Kubicek and Mallory Cyr from Next Step. Good afternoon and welcome to Picking Up the Pieces, where we dare to persevere and help young adults reach their full potential. We're very excited. Today we're joined with Michael Travellini. He's going to be my guest host today as we interview Next Steps.
Thank you, Kim. With us today we have Bill Kubicek and Mallory Cyr. Bill, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, happy to. Thanks for having us on. My name is Bill Kubicek. I'm the executive director and founder of Next Step. And Next Step was founded to support those teens and young adults that you spoke about in their transition into adulthood while living with life-threatening illness, cancer, HIV, sickle cell, and rare blood diseases.
Great.
Wow.
Good. And Mallory, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am the program coordinator for the Face Forward project, which is a program of Next Step, and it's for youth with rare genetic and metabolic diseases. I also am a young adult myself growing up with a chronic health condition, and I currently am pursuing my master's degree at Boston University, so I just recently transitioned to the Boston area, and I'm really excited to be closer and be able to work more closely with Next Step.
Great.
Fantastic.
Welcome.
Fantastic. We're happy to have you both here. So let's talk a little bit about what is Next Step, Bill.
Next Step was founded in 2001. We've been around we had our 11th birthday last month. And we provide support programs for teens and young adults that are moving towards independent living while living with significant health issues. So our programs are nationwide. We actually piloted a program in South Africa as well, but our focus is really concentrated in the New England area. Mallory spoke briefly about the Face Forward project, which is one of our core programs, which is for for young people living with metabolic, mitochondrial, and rare genetic diseases. We also have a program called One Love for young people with HIV that are living with HIV. The Strive program is for young people living with sickle cell. And the Face to Face project is for young people that are living with a cancer diagnosis.
Wow. So you're doing so many amazing work, so much amazing work. So it kind of calls to mind, how did you get started in this? It's not something, it's very specific and very kind of determined to help people. How did it begin?
So in the early 90s, I started working at a place called the Hole in the Wall Gang Camp, which is Paul Newman's first summer camp for children living with life-threatening illnesses, and that was right out of college. It seemed like a good way to spend my summers. And that was actually where I met Mallory as a young person attending that camp when she was
10.
10?
Wow.
10.
Wow.
Long time ago.
Not that long ago.
And I was there for 11 years, and over the course of my time there, I got to know a lot of the families and the young people particularly as they grew from 10-year-olds into 15, 16, 17-year-olds, and realized that there was a huge gap in our services where we have significant support on the pediatric side of things, and then when they move into the adult care for the medical community, but also adult services, whether it's educational, psychosocial, medical, all of those support services changed so drastically, and there really isn't a bridge program. So we began to pilot some programs there, and they were very successful. And that kind of moved me in with the support of Paul Newman to begin Next Step in 2001,
Wow.
and we haven't looked back since.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Great. Mallory, tell me about your experience with Next Step.
So it's been a really cool journey. As Bill said, I started as a camper when I was 10 years old, and transitioning through those various ages, and then as Bill referenced, when you age out of something like that, a lot of people don't realize how that support and that motivation and just all of those sort of key elements are not there anymore. And as a young adult who is already questioning who they are, you know, what they've been handed, it's really hard when your peers don't really understand that and understand what you're going through. And so I think Next Step is just such a powerful organization because not only does it focus on transition and life skills and understanding how to be a consumer in the system, it also gives you that hope and that support that can't be provided by somebody else who doesn't necessarily understand, or as we say, you know, people who don't get it.
Right.
So it's been such an amazing journey growing up with camp and with Bill and seeing the power of something like that and then being able to then create that for other young people who may not have had that experience previously.
So, can you give me some examples how Next Step has really helped you?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think first of all, the organization and just the support from Bill and the other, you know, my colleagues at Next Step, my transition to Boston has been, in a sense, a project of Next Step.
Yes.
You know, transitioning with special healthcare needs, and also my boyfriend who lives with me is a wheelchair user, and so navigating finding accessible housing in Boston.
Wow, yes.
And, you know, there's such a sounding board for healthcare as I'm still navigating finding new providers, finding support services, and not being from the area. You know, I call Bill up and I go, if you needed to go somewhere for this, you know, where would you go? Where should I go? And I just think it's just such a support network, you know, sharing, understanding, you know, what it is like to have to worry about those things, not just transitioning to school and, you know, employment and all these things, but really the other aspects of what it means to be a young adult living with a chronic illness.
What do you think is most challenging for yourself with a chronic illness when you think about your day, or you think about maybe when you were younger? What do you think was the most challenging aspect of your chronic illness?
I think really, especially right now for me, is finding the balance of being able to go to school, being able to work, having a social life, but also getting those basic healthcare needs met. You know, for me recently, it's been simple things like I have to make a dentist appointment, but I also have class till 9 o'clock at night, and you can't, you know, call places after, you know, 5. Just really juggling everything that you have to do and be to everybody else, and also taking care of your health. It's sort of difficult being an advocate for putting your health first, and I think a lot of times
Yes.
as professionals, you know, we don't always put our health first. But when you are a young person with a chronic illness, you can't let that stuff go the same way that you may if you're just a college student. So I think really keeping that self-awareness of how am I feeling, what is my body doing, what are the things that I've let go a little bit too long and now really need to get on, is always in the back of your mind and has to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just recently, I do a training called Core Gift and Peer Providers, and I had 2 peer providers, which are people with lived experience, in this case with mental health issues, come and talk to the young adults in the training. And you could have heard a pin drop in the room because they were just amazing stories. One of the gentlemen had such a history that he had overcome in order to help other people. And he talked about having to sleep, having to make sure that he slept enough in order to be well and to care for other people. And it was so important to his self-care. And he said, you know, I've tried at different points to not sleep the amount of time that I need, that I know that I need, and it comes back up to bite him. And he can't be the kind of peer provider he wants to be, can't do the things he wants to do, and just being that aware. So he has to both role model self-care and role model, you know, being a good provider. So it's a very interesting mix, and it was great for the young adults to hear, because I can talk about self-care and I have these great, fun, interesting activities, but when they hear it from another young person who's been there, done that, they just pay such attention. And I know that youth-led is a huge piece of what Next Step is. Can you talk about why it's so important for your organization?
Sure, and I think Mallory is she's the perfect example. I fall behind everything that you just mentioned, because no matter how many years or how many degrees or how much experience you have providing for a young person, many times the cement that binds the youth and really engages them is other youth that can relate to their story. And Mallory has been such a huge. I believe early on she was perhaps a benefactor, but now she benefits so many people by her leadership and just the charisma that she brings to telling her own story, whether it's virtually online or whether it's in person with our conferences or our day programs. So that peer mentorship is absolutely a core staple of what we do. We're youth-led, so every program that we do, the idea comes from the youth. We set up a system of being able to have the youth design it in a very structured way. And then they tell us exactly what needs to be covered and how it needs to be covered from soup to nuts. And then we bring in the experts to help to guide the conversation and make sure that the information that's coming in is accurate. But we get out of the way and let the youth create the community around building the program for the benefit of the larger community. And it's such an engaging idea for youth to be able to give back, because you have to ascend to a certain level to be able to say it's time for me to give back. So it's also, there's a lot of efficacy that comes through that and positive reinforcement.
Absolutely, absolutely. When you get a young adult engaged, it's a whole different level. We had a young woman that was struggling and in crisis at one point when I worked at BU Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation, and we said we were going to the food bank to separate cans, and she said, I want to come, and we all kind of, okay, yeah, she can come. We know we're all there to support her, and we went with a lot of young adults. And she went through the night beaming, just kind of ear to ear smiling, and at the end of the day, they read off how many families you've fed, and they read it off, and she was like, I've never seen her stand up taller, and she was all excited. She said, "Can I have that piece of paper?" and she said, and she went back, and the next day was telling everyone, "Do you know how many families I've?" And she said out loud, "I've never helped anybody else." And it really kind of began her recovery process to think about, okay, I can give back, I can do this. And it's really important.
And I think too is that conferences are really powerful, and having presentations and speakers, all of those things are great. But I think the most impacting thing of, for me, Face Forward, is witnessing literally from the time that those young adults' eyes open in the morning to the time they close, they're learning from each other.
Yes.
And, we're getting hooked up to our IVs side by side at night and going, oh, you use that method, I do this, and, sharing stories about how do you do a dressing that doesn't hide, that doesn't show it with your bathing suit, and all these things that you just can't have those conversations with anybody else. And so it's just this extreme effort to just soak up all the information, and those relationships that are built during those times are just irreplaceable. And you see those relationships develop and are maintained, and it's really powerful.
During our last conference, Mallory developed an award for was it the 4 or 5 young women that were all on IV feeds overnight, and what was the name of the award? It was hysterical, and they were so proud.
Real divas have tubes. I found this graphic in a magazine, and it was a silhouette of a woman with high heels and flowing hair, and she had an IV pole. And the idea was that it was hair color, that your hair color is so saturated, it's like getting infused to you. But I saw the graphic and I was like, this is like who we are, how we see ourselves. We see ourselves as strong, powerful women who just have this accessory.
Right.
And I just thought it was such a metaphor of what I had been trying to instill in these girls, is that you're still strong, confident, beautiful women. This is just something that your body needs. And so they just had such a great reaction, and some of them were like, I never thought of myself as a diva before. I was like, you so are. But it's just, the way that you can see that self-perception change over a period of 4 days.
You can reach young adults in a very extremely different way because of your lived experience. You are able to connect with them, and it's incredibly powerful. And there's nothing that really replaces it. We had a young woman on an inpatient unit in the hospital who was really struggling, and she had obtained a device that she could hurt herself with. And she had literally locked herself in a room and none of the providers, she wouldn't interact with any of the providers, but we had a peer provider, asked to speak with her, and she allowed her in. And they conversed for, 45 minutes to an hour, and the young adult handed over the device and said, no one's ever got it like you got it. No one ever understood. No one really listened to me the way you did. And they've been going on to this journey. We don't know what would have happened. We don't even want to think that way. But the peer-to-peer is just incredible. And it sounds like your camp, you teach these skills so that you can help connect. And having you present that is so much more powerful than someone else. And I don't think anyone else could have come up. I wouldn't have connected that in that way with the graphic, but you're thinking the way the young adults are thinking. And it's very much a universal design that no matter what you experience, you can connect with everyone else. And there's no different. That's really powerful.
And I think it also allows the young people to really design and develop into the future in a way that they hadn't imagined before.
Yes.
We had a group of young people that really wanted to have difficult conversations about what is it like to know that your prognosis is poor. How do you manage that conversation? You can't talk to your parents about it. You can't talk to your peers about it. You can't even talk to your pediatric providers because oftentimes they've known you your entire life. And that's a very challenging conversation for them to have as well.
Right.
So they got in a room and they were like, can we talk about it? And they were like, absolutely, let's. This is really important for us to be able to have this conversation. And that's an example where, because I'm in the room, I can say, so let's make sure that everybody in the room is safe.
Right.
And that we've got the kind of support that we need because this can bring some things up, but we absolutely want to be able to create the environment for you to have that conversation and be able to explore that because it's with you every day whether you talk about it or not.
Right.
So it's so much healthier to be able to find a group of people that are your peers that you can have that conversation with.
Otherwise, it weighs on you because if you can't articulate it, and that's where depression can come in, that's where lots of challenging situations can come in. It's very powerful when someone knows you and understands you. We had the gentleman come in who was a peer provider. He'd been working with this young man who was going back to work. And the young man went back to work and was hearing voices and had to quit his job. And he was able to tell the peer provider, I'm hearing voices, this is very challenging for me. And a lot of people had said he's lazy or he's unmotivated, that's why he's quitting jobs. And it wasn't true. It was that his disability was really getting in the way. So when he was able to really share, and I don't think he would have shared it with anyone else except he had developed this great relationship with the peer provider. Then he was able to say, okay, now I can really find the right job that's right for me and moving forward. Right. It sounds like that was kind of a catharsis that happened. These people really get it. It's really complicated to explain, but when someone kind of really knows what it's like to experience that, it helps everyone move forward.
And it is, there are a lot of, highly emotional times, and, there are breakthroughs and these things that happen, and sometimes you have to step back and just let that young person go through that process, knowing that you're there for support. But these are the realizations that they may come to about their health, about their prognosis, and it's just creating that supportive environment for that process to occur in a healthy way. I think is just so important.
Right, absolutely. And the healthy way is the key piece. And there are lots of supports, and you're all developing the skills to be able to talk about it. Because if you just kind of dump on someone else, then it's not productive for anyone. But okay, how do we do this and manage it and navigate it in a skillful, supportive way?
And if Next Step does anything, it's really we create the safe community.
Yes.
So we want to build a community where everybody takes responsibility not only for their message, but for the stories of everyone else.
Yes.
So that's the key, and that's where I think our experience and expertise really comes into play, that people come and they feel safe, and that frees them to be a person that they may not feel comfortable being in another setting. And that's difficult for a young, we often forget they're young people.
Exactly.
Like they're still novices at being these independent adults. They're just developing the skills. So to create a safe environment for them to explore is what a teenager and young adult is supposed to do. They're supposed to make some mistakes.
Absolutely. That brings up a question for me is like, what do you do for the transition from childhood into adulthood? How do you stay connected, and what goes on with that transition? Talk a little bit more about that, Bill.
Sure, I think that's the hole that we noticed. And if you think about all of the major social institutions, whether it's education or healthcare particularly, and then there's also mental health care, there's generally a pediatric environment and an adult care environment. And oftentimes they're somewhat at odds with each other.
Yes.
And that's the difficult thing that we've been really pounding against for the last 10 years, is trying to create that bridge where they communicate and there's actually overlap, and there's shared resources and so on. Because it's an entirely different structure, and I think oftentimes it's a battle of attrition for young people, because you send them off to college and they either make it or they don't, and you've got a high-functioning, quote-unquote, normal young person, and they have to kind of knuckle down and they have to put up or shut up. But oftentimes it's not a fair playing field for a young person that's coming in and needs accommodations. And for children, we're very good at providing accommodations and support systems.
Yes.
You see Barney on the wall in the hospital room. You've got a play therapist, a music therapist, a child life specialist, all coming in to visit, social workers. But it's a very different set of standards for the adult health care. And I think Mallory, again, has put herself out front in being a voice for transitional medical care in the country. I mean, not just locally, but in the country. She's very well known for it. So I'm going to pass it, more what the individual experience is in moving forward over to her. But we're talking about it constantly. And again, our goal is to provide a safe environment that's very positively charged.
Yes.
So they're sharing best practices with each other, as opposed to the stories of the nightmare nurse that came in that didn't know their name. We want to know what worked, and we want them to share those strategies.
Are there
with one
specific
another.
services that you provide for young adults that specifically that you wouldn't provide for children? I mean, what do you have? Can you name some of those services? Mallory or Bill?
I don't even think it's so much a matter of specific services. I think it's about the infrastructure and the level of support. I almost had to kind of laugh when you said, what is the answer to transition? What is that like? I ask myself that every day. But I think that is the key message, is that we have to get away from the idea that transition is sort of a finite process. Excuse me. But transition really doesn't end with finding an adult provider. It doesn't end with finding an accessible apartment or finding a job. It's ongoing, and it's very cyclical. Even for me, I really had transition. I had at one point moved away. I had a job. I went to college. I did all this great stuff. But moving to Boston, I now, I feel like I don't know where to begin again. And with the adult healthcare system versus pediatric, it's very much, follow-up. You have to keep calling. You may not speak to the same provider twice. It's knowing the questions to ask. It's knowing what to tell what people at what point. It's knowing where to go for what health services. It's very multi-level. And I think also as a young person, having the time to devote to that process, and having people you can go to as a sounding board, which is what Next Step is great for, as, okay, so I called this provider, they told me to talk to this person, what do I do now?
Great.
It's just having that determination of, all I want to do is find a primary care physician, and knowing the steps to take, thinking about insurance, thinking about how you're going to get there, where it is it accessible? Are they comfortable with someone who has more complex health needs? It's not just as simple as going with your mom and dad to the doctor anymore.
Right.
So there are so many things to think about, and I think that in transition and the adult side of things, whether healthcare, housing, or whatever, thinking about all aspects of yourself and your condition, and knowing the steps to follow, and also not letting that process break you down. Because again, with the psychosocial piece, there's a daily wear and tear of having a chronic health need.
Yes.
And having to go through those steps over and over and over, and telling your story to, providers again and again and again. Eventually you just want to be like, if you don't get it by now, I'm done. Forget it. I don't want what you have to offer.
Right.
But you need it, and you know that you need it. So finding that balance, and again, that self-care piece, I think there's just so many levels, and there's no right answer to transition.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. And you've given us a tremendous amount to think about. What I want to do is I want to, we need to wrap up. So we want to do two last things. One is I want to put on the screen the website of Next Steps so people know how to, Next Step, how to reach you and what information if they have other questions. And my last question is to you, Mallory. What advice would you share with someone who has similar challenges? What kind of leave them with some hope or inspiration? We know there's a lot of challenges, and thankfully there's your wonderful program, but what would you say to someone who's thinking, kind of approaching this transition?
Yeah. I think my key message is just don't lose sight of who you are, regardless of your diagnosis, regardless of the process and how daunting it often feels to just get your needs met. Remember why you're going through that process.
Yes.
Why do you want to be at your best health? And I think you referenced that earlier, which is really amazing. Why do you want to be healthy? What is good in your life? What do you have to get up for in the morning? And, think about those answers and how maybe you can find things that give you those answers. Finding a support community like Next Step, having those peers who really understand what you're going through. Just, make sure that you're fulfilled, not just surviving, but thriving.
Absolutely.
And I
Absolutely.
think that is really what Next Step and Face Forward are all about, is giving that next level of being healthy, but also being fulfilled. Because if you're not, it doesn't matter if you're healthy. So
Absolutely.
that would be my advice.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mallory, for being on the show. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you coming and telling us all about your program and your personal experiences. Thank you to Michael for being our guest host. Very exciting.
Thank you, Kim.
You saw it here first on Picking Up the Pieces. And I'd like to say thank you to our audience once again for tuning in to Picking Up the Pieces, where we dare to persevere and help young adults reach their full potential. Thank you to the Department of Mental Health for sponsoring our show. And I'd like you to look out for someone who might just be in need of that extra support, because you may make the difference and help them reach their full potential. This is Kim Bissett saying have a great day.